I remember back when I thought I had it all figured out. Life had a kind of steady rhythm, comfortable, predictable. I was married to Linda, a beautiful woman who I believed would always be by my side. In my mind, loyalty was the cornerstone of love, and I believed that as long as I was there, providing, protecting, and staying committed, we'd be solid. But deep down, I carried these lingering insecurities, mostly around money and success. I'd worked hard, but I didn't quite feel I'd made it. There was always this nagging feeling that I wasn't enough. And even though Linda and I had a good life, I sometimes wondered if she felt like she'd ended up with the right man. We had our dreams, but I worried that I didn't match up to the husband she saw in her circle, or even in those polished TV shows she liked. Even with these thoughts creeping in, I kept my doubts buried. I couldn't shake the belief that Linda was loyal, that she'd chosen me for who I was. I trusted that she loved me for my values, not my paycheck. So I closed my eyes to any signs that things might not be as perfect as I wanted to believe. After all, this belief that love, loyalty, and commitment would see us through anything was my rock. I held on to it, building my life and dreams on top of it, never suspecting it might eventually crack under the pressure. But as I'd soon learn, sometimes the cracks that form are the ones we refuse to see. And maybe, just maybe, I was clinging to a version of our relationship that existed only in my mind. As time went on, I started to notice subtle shifts in our relationship. They were small things that most people would probably dismiss. Linda would sit across from me at the dinner table, and while we used to fill those moments with laughter and stories from our day, now there was a quietness between us that seemed to stretch longer each night. She seemed distant, like she was somewhere else, even when she was right there. I'd ask her about her day, but her answers were short, almost like she was holding back. And when I'd reach out to comfort her, or even just give her a hug, I felt this odd resistance, as if my touch was something she no longer needed. I told myself I was imagining things, that maybe it was just stress or a phase she was going through, but it gnawed at me. I could feel the warmth fading between us, a coldness taking its place that I couldn't explain. And yet, I didn't ask too many questions. I didn't want to rock the boat, didn't want to admit that maybe the love I thought was unbreakable had started to wear thin. So I brushed it off, pushing down the unease and clinging tighter to my belief that everything would be okay. One evening, after weeks of feeling that silent distance grow between us, I finally worked up the nerve to ask Linda what was going on. I thought maybe she'd tell me she was stressed, maybe going through something personal she hadn't wanted to burden me with. But when I looked her in the eye and asked, "Is everything okay between us?" I saw a flash of something I hadn't expected: hesitation, almost as if she was deciding whether or not to say what was really on her mind. And then she spoke, slowly, carefully, but with a kind of honesty I hadn't heard in years. "Mark," she said, "I don't know if I'm happy anymore. I feel like we're living separate lives under the same roof." It felt like the ground had just given way beneath me. Her words cut deep because for the first time I had to confront the reality that maybe my love and loyalty alone hadn't been enough. I'd held on to this idea that as long as I was steady and present, everything else would fall into place. But here she was, telling me that something was missing, that she felt lost and unfulfilled despite everything I'd tried to provide. I could feel my heart breaking in that moment. There was a desperate part of me that wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, that we could fix it. But instead, I just sat there, feeling the weight of her words settle in. For the first time, I had to face the truth I'd been avoiding. Our love had changed, and I couldn't fix it by pretending everything was okay. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop replaying Linda's words in my mind. I feel like we're living separate lives. Those words echoed in my head like a broken record, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was right. As much as I wanted to blame her, part of me knew I had to look inward, face the uncomfortable truth that I might be part of the problem. I started to ask myself, what had I been doing wrong? I realized that over the years, I'd put all my focus on my career. I worked long hours, spent weekends chasing after bigger clients, all in the hope of building a future where we could live comfortably. I thought I was doing the right thing, providing for us both, securing our future. But what good was that if I wasn't present in our lives, if I wasn't truly there for Linda when she needed me? I saw now that I'd neglected the emotional side of our relationship. I hadn't paid attention to the little things, the moments when she just needed to talk, the quiet times when she needed reassurance, or even just to feel seen. I thought I could buy her happiness with my success, but I realize now that I couldn't fill the gaps in our relationship with money or status, and I hated myself for it. It wasn't easy to admit, but I was starting to understand that my actions had created the space that allowed this distance to grow. I'd been so focused on securing our future, I hadn't been there to nurture the present. The days after our conversation were some of the hardest of my life. The distance between Linda and me seemed to grow with every passing moment, and the tension in the house became unbearable. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Our marriage was slipping away, and I knew it. I had tried everything. I had been patient. I had tried to listen, to reassure her, but in the end, I knew the truth. No amount of effort or love could fix what had been broken. There was no turning back. We had drifted so far apart that the relationship felt like a shadow of what it once was. And as much as I hated it, I knew I had to let go. One night, after a long day at work, I sat down with Linda again. The words felt heavy on my tongue as I said, "Maybe it's time for us to part ways." She didn't cry, didn't shout. She just looked at me, her eyes full of sadness and acceptance. I could see it in her face. She knew this was the right decision, even if it wasn't the one either of us wanted. It hurt more than I could ever explain. I had spent years building a life with this woman, and now I was choosing to walk away from it. But I also knew that staying in a relationship where neither of us was truly happy would only prolong the inevitable. And the truth was, I loved her too much to let her continue living a life that wasn't fulfilling for her. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but I made the choice to let her go, hoping she would find the happiness she deserved, even if it wasn't with me. The weeks after the breakup were a blur of conflicting emotions. At first, I felt a strange sense of relief, like I'd finally made the right decision, like I could breathe again. But soon enough, that relief turned into a heavy weight I couldn't shake. The loneliness crept in, and the guilt started to eat at me. I kept wondering if I could have done more, if I could have been a better husband. I should have listened more. I should have spent less time working and more time being present with Linda. The what-ifs played on a loop in my mind. Maybe if I had made more effort, things wouldn't have fallen apart. Maybe if I had been more open with her, things would have been different. But there were moments when I had to be honest with myself. I had made mistakes, yes, but so had she. We both had played our parts in the breakdown of our relationship, and as painful as it was, I knew it was time to heal, to learn from my mistakes. I started focusing on myself again, rediscovering hobbies I'd neglected, spending time with friends who had always been there for me. It wasn't easy. Every day felt like a battle, but slowly I began to feel a shift. The pain didn't go away completely, but I was beginning to realize that this wasn't the end of me. This was just the beginning of something new, something better. After months of struggling with the fallout from my breakup with Linda, I finally reached a point where I had to ask myself a crucial question. Who was I now? For so long, I had defined myself by my role in the relationship, by the husband I was supposed to be, by the provider I thought I needed to be. But now that all of that was gone, I had to find a new identity. I took a long, hard look at myself and realized something important. I had spent so much of my life putting others first, chasing success for the sake of proving myself, building a life based on external validation, and I had neglected the one person who needed me most, me. So, I started small. I took up running again, something I hadn't done in years. It felt good to sweat, to challenge myself physically, to remind myself that I was capable of more than I had allowed myself to believe. Slowly, the confidence I had lost started to come back. I took time to reconnect with friends, people who had always been there for me, but had been pushed aside when I was consumed by my marriage. I started to feel a sense of purpose again, not because of anyone else, but because I was finally taking care of myself. I also began to reflect on the lessons I had learned from my relationship with Linda. I realized that for all my mistakes, I had grown in ways I hadn't anticipated. I was stronger, more self-aware, and more certain of what I wanted out of life. The breakup hadn't destroyed me. It had set me free. It's funny how life can throw you into the unknown, but sometimes that's exactly what you need. After months of rebuilding my life, I found myself in a place I had never imagined. I had rediscovered my independence, my strength, and my purpose. But more importantly, I began to see that this chapter wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something new. I started saying yes to opportunities I would have once turned down. I signed up for a professional course I'd always wanted to take but never had the time for. I traveled to places I had dreamed about but had put on hold for years. There was this incredible sense of freedom that I couldn't quite explain, like I was finally living for myself. The weight of guilt and regret had lessened, replaced with a sense of excitement for what was to come. One day, while attending a work event, I met someone who would change everything. Her name was Claire. She was kind, funny, and so easy to talk to. We shared a lot in common, but what really stood out to me was her warmth. She wasn't interested in the status I'd built or the success I'd achieved. She was simply interested in me. That was something I hadn't felt in a long time, and in her, I saw the possibility of a new, more fulfilling kind of love, one built on honesty, respect, and mutual understanding. As I got to know Claire, I realized how much I had grown since my breakup with Linda. I wasn't the same man I had been during our marriage. I had learned what it meant to put myself first, to build a life I was proud of, and to value the right kind of relationship. And now, I was ready for a new beginning. As time passed, Claire and I grew closer, and I found myself experiencing something I hadn't felt in years: genuine joy. The connection between us was effortless, a breath of fresh air compared to the complicated, often tense relationship I had with Linda. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people enjoying each other's company and learning about one another. What stood out the most was how Claire made me feel about myself. She wasn't looking for me to be someone I wasn't. She accepted me for exactly who I was, flaws and all. With her, I didn't feel the need to put on a mask or pretend to be something I wasn't. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly seen. I realized that love wasn't about chasing perfection or trying to make things work out of obligation. With Claire, love felt natural, almost like a reward for the work I had done on myself. I had spent so many years doubting whether I could ever find true love again, and yet here I was with someone who made me feel valued and understood in ways I had never known before. But more than that, I learned that love isn't just about finding the right person. It's about being the right person. I had to heal, to grow, and to learn to love myself before I could love someone else in a healthy way. And now, with Claire, I felt ready to build something real, something that was built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared dreams, and a deep emotional connection. As Claire and I continued to grow closer, I realized something that completely changed my perspective on life. In the past, I had feared that love was something to be carefully managed, something you could lose at any moment if you weren't constantly vigilant. But with Claire, I saw that love, in its truest form, is something that should be embraced, not feared. It's not about control or holding on to something out of fear of loss. It's about trust, partnership, and the shared joy of walking through life together. We talked about our dreams for the future, the things we wanted to accomplish as individuals and as a couple. It was incredible to realize that we were aligned in so many ways. Both of us wanted a life that was fulfilling, not just for ourselves, but for the people around us. There was a sense of adventure, of possibility, and I knew I wanted to experience all of it with her, by my side. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The pain from my past had shaped me, yes, but it hadn't broken me, and it hadn't defined my future. I realize now that every challenge, every heartbreak, had led me to this point, where I was strong enough to build something real and lasting with someone who truly understood me. I had learned to let go of the past, to heal, and to trust again. And in Claire, I found not just a partner, but a best friend, someone who made me feel whole in a way I hadn't thought possible. Together, we were building a future that was grounded in mutual respect, love, and a deep commitment to supporting each other. This was my new beginning, a future where love wasn't a burden, but a gift. And with Claire, I knew I could embrace it fully.